Trump thought he could bully Canada into submission with his trade war tactics, but Prime Minister Mark Carney just flipped the entire game. What started as Trump's attempt to leverage tariffs for border security has transformed into a strategic miscalculation that's strengthening Canadian resolve while damaging American businesses. We're looking at how Carney turned Trump's economic pressure into political opportunity and why this trade war might be backfiring spectacularly on the United States. So what exactly happened when Trump raised the stakes to 35%? And how did Carney respond with a masterclass in economic diplomacy? To understand this escalation, we need to rewind to February 2025 when Trump first launched his tariff offensive. The newly inaugurated president declared a national emergency under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, citing the flow of fentanyl and illegal immigration across the northern border. Trump imposed a 25% tariff on most Canadian imports and a 10% tariff on Canadian energy products, claiming Canada had failed to cooperate in curbing drug trafficking across the northern border.
What is your strategy for when the US, Mexico, Canada trade deal is reviewed next summer? Are you hoping the US economy by that stage is in a position where President Trump takes a different view on tariffs?
We want the best for the US economy, just as we want, slightly stronger, we want the best for the Canadian economy. But so no, our strategy is not to expect some weakness in the US economy that is going to change US negotiating position. Our strategy, part of our strategy has been to pursue the best deal for Canada. We have the best trade deal at the moment. 85% of our trade with the United States is tariff-free. We have the lowest average tariff against of any country with the US. It's 5.5%. So we're in a good position now with two important caveats. One is your question, what's going to happen with the renegotiation of what they call USMCA? And secondly, some key sectors, steel, autos, aluminum, forest products being the main ones. We'll make it increasingly clear that in certain sectors, particularly, the integration of the Canadian and US and Mexican economies is essential to US competitiveness. So in steel, in autos, as two examples, that the linkages are so tight. They're so tight such that the the US content in Canadian finished automobiles is higher than the average US content in American automobiles. So we make America stronger in these sectors, and our strategy is to make sure that that is as well understood as possible.
Okay, so the prosperity of both countries is at stake. Your language, though, has changed on President Trump since you came to office. Do you remember when you talked about him as a bully that needed to be stood up to? In February, when you were campaigning, we're going to stand up to a bully, we're not.
This wasn't just about trade. Trump was using economic warfare to force compliance on border security issues. The Canadian response came swiftly and with surgical precision. Within days, the Canadian government announced a $155 billion retaliatory tariff package targeting American goods. The first phase hit $30 billion worth of U.S. imports with 25% tariffs, targeting everything from cosmetics and appliances to paper products and tires. But this was just the opening move in what would become a sophisticated counter-strategy. Prime Minister Mark Carney, who had taken office after Justin Trudeau's resignation, understood that this trade war presented both a crisis and an opportunity. The political timing couldn't have been more perfect for Carney. Trump's aggressive tactics and his repeated jokes about making Canada the 51st state triggered a wave of Canadian nationalism that transformed Carney from an untested leader into a national champion. Carney's Liberal Party, which had been trailing in polls under Trudeau, suddenly found itself riding a surge of patriotic fervor. When Trump suggested annexation, Carney's firm response resonated powerfully with Canadian voters. Standing before Parliament, he declared with unwavering conviction, "There are some places that are never for sale. Canada is not for sale and won't be for sale ever."
You better fight like hell, don't roll over, and keep fighting. He drives me absolutely crazy. He does. And we aren't going to roll over. I'm not going to let him roll over Ontario.
You can't question Premier Doug Ford's passion when it comes to U.S. tariffs. He was riled up because Stellantis announced this week it would move planned production of its Jeep Compass from Brampton to Illinois. Prime Minister Mark Carney says the CEO of Stellantis assured him the company would consider other vehicles for the plant.
Well, Premier Ford and I are both interested in results for and his.
The political momentum was undeniable. By March 2025, Carney had called snap elections, framing the vote as a referendum on Canadian sovereignty. His campaign message was clear. Canadians needed to give him a strong mandate to deal with Trump's aggression. The strategy worked brilliantly. Carney won decisively, transforming what Trump intended as economic pressure into a political victory. Trump himself acknowledged this irony, noting, "I think I was probably the greatest thing that happened to him." But Trump wasn't finished escalating. On August 1st, 2025, the White House announced another dramatic increase, raising tariffs from 25% to 35% on Canadian goods not protected by the USMCA agreement. The official justification remained border security and drug trafficking, but sources suggested Trump was also responding to Carney's plans to recognize a Palestinian state. The message was clear. Trump was willing to use trade as a weapon for any diplomatic disagreement.
Well, a few things. The lumber sector is very much feeling somewhat ignored. They were promised support back in the summer. It hasn't rolled out yet. It's supposedly coming in a few weeks. To your central question, though, Vashi, about do you fight or do you talk? Well, obviously, both is possible because that's what the president does all the time while he's talking. And I think it's necessary but not sufficient to be on his good side, as James talked about. It's nice that they're getting along. The president doesn't call our prime minister names, although he still talks about taking over a country, which is perplexing and annoying and angering to a lot of people. But he is constantly putting more tariffs on. So Brian's point about the results, that's what's going to matter. But it's real hard to turn to auto workers, steel workers, aluminum, forestry, fish. Like the list is getting long and say, we're getting along better, but the tariffs keep getting higher and higher and you're losing your job. So I think it's nothing wrong with flattery and all those things if it gets you results. But the coalition the prime minister needs of the premiers and industry supporting his approach, I think is starting to fracture a little bit. I think it's starting to show weakness. It was very unified 5-6 months ago, but it was all on this bet that we could pacify this president, mollify him, and actually get to a trade deal. But then we hear his trade representative saying, forget it on auto, and then more and more tariffs hitting Canadians and Canadian workers.
The 35% tariff represented a significant escalation, but Carney's response revealed the sophistication of Canadian strategy. Rather than matching Trump's rhetoric with angry denunciations, Carney expressed measured disappointment while highlighting the facts. Canada accounts for only 1% of fentanyl entering the United States, far less than Mexico or China. Canadian officials had already been working intensively on border security, making historic investments in drug interdiction and migrant smuggling prevention. More importantly, Carney understood the economic realities that Trump was ignoring. The USMCA agreement, which Trump himself had negotiated during his first term, protected most Canadian manufactured goods from these tariffs. This meant that while Trump's 35% rate sounded dramatic, the actual impact on Canadian exports was limited. Carney could accurately claim that Canada still had the lowest tariff in the world with the United States, undermining Trump's narrative of economic dominance. The real genius of Carney's approach became clear in his domestic response strategy. Instead of simply retaliating with more tariffs, Canada launched a comprehensive Buy Canadian campaign that transformed the trade war into an opportunity for economic nationalism. The government replaced its previous best efforts to purchase Canadian products with a clear obligation to do so. This wasn't just protectionism, it was nation-building through adversity. Carney announced billions in funding for Canadian businesses affected by the trade war, including increased loan sizes for small and medium enterprises and lower interest rates for companies adapting to new trade realities. The government also launched a $370 million biofuel production incentive to help Canadian canola, beef, and seafood industries hit by Chinese tariffs, showing how Canada was using the crisis to diversify away from dependence on both American and Chinese markets. The psychological impact of the trade war on both countries tells the real story of who's winning. In Canada, the Boycott America movement has taken on a life of its own. Canadians are choosing Italian tomatoes over Californian ones, Ontario pepperoni over Ohio products, and Canadian maple syrup sparkling water over Coca-Cola. Tourism from Canada to the United States has plummeted, hitting American businesses from Florida to California.
Despite that positive meeting at the White House a week ago, those U.S. tariffs on Canadian wood and furniture took effect at midnight. And people in the industry say it's already.
Tariff means that Canadian wood has a higher tariff rate going to the United States than Russia does.
The Federal Reserve's Beige Book specifically noted the material drop in cross-border tourism as a significant economic factor. Meanwhile, American businesses are struggling with the reality of higher costs and supply chain disruptions. Cedar Ridge Distillery in Iowa was forced to abandon European markets due to retaliatory tariffs. Virginia Distillery saw its Canadian sales collapse to zero after previously planning to triple that business. These aren't abstract economic statistics. They're real American jobs and businesses suffering from Trump's trade war strategy. The strategic meetings between Trump and Carney reveal the shifting power dynamics. During their October 2025 White House meeting, Trump promised that Carney would walk away happy, but no concrete deal materialized. Carney's approach was notably different from his predecessor Trudeau's more confrontational style. He wore a red tie to appeal to Trump's Republican sensibilities, maintained cordial relations, and even exchanged text messages with the American president. But beneath the diplomatic niceties, Carney held firm on core Canadian interests. When Trump pressed his annexation ideas, Carney shut them down definitively. When Trump complained about trade deficits, Carney highlighted Canada's role as America's largest foreign investor, with $500 billion invested in the last 5 years alone. The message was subtle but clear. Canada had leverage too.
Here at home, Mark Carney needs to get out of the way. He needs to get out of the way of our industrial, steel, autos, and other sectors by getting rid of the industrial carbon tax that's contributing to job losses. We can't have a Carney carbon tax and Trump tariffs at the same time. Get out of the way and allow businesses to build pipelines, dig mines, approve ports, plants, LNG facilities, and countless other economic infrastructure that we can build without President Trump. Get out of the way and remove all taxes off of home building so that we can build houses that our people can afford. Home building is a Trump-proof sector. Get out of the way so that our workers can work, our businesses can build, and our economy can be strong.
Carney's masterstroke was reframing the entire relationship. In a remarkable statement that flew under the media radar, he declared, "The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperation, is over." This wasn't angry rhetoric, it was strategic repositioning. Carney was preparing Canada for a post-integrated North American economy where Canadian prosperity didn't depend on American goodwill. The economic data supports Carney's confidence. Despite Trump's tariffs, most Canadian goods still enter the United States tariff-free under USMCA protections. Canada remains America's second largest trading partner, with $2.5 billion in goods and services crossing the border daily. The trade relationship is so integrated that American consumers and businesses bear much of the cost of Trump's tariffs through higher prices and supply chain disruptions. Trump's fundamental miscalculation was assuming that economic pressure would translate into political compliance. Instead, his tariffs became a gift to Canadian nationalism and Carney's political fortunes. The trade war that was supposed to demonstrate American dominance has instead showcased Canadian resilience and strategic thinking. Carney transformed Trump's intended punishment into a mandate for Canadian independence. The broader implications extend far beyond North America. Other countries facing American trade pressure are watching how a middle power like Canada can successfully resist economic coercion through strategic patience, domestic mobilization, and diplomatic skill. Carney's approach offers a template for maintaining sovereignty while managing relationships with more powerful neighbors. As we look ahead, the mandatory review of the USMCA agreement in 2026 looms as the next major battleground. Trump has suggested he might prefer bilateral deals over the trilateral arrangement. But Carney has already signaled that changes will be necessary given how Trump has taken advantage of existing aspects of USMCA. The Canadian position is clear. Any new agreement must account for the reality that America is no longer a reliable partner committed to the rules-based trading system. The ultimate irony is that Trump's trade war has achieved the opposite of its stated goals. Instead of forcing Canadian compliance, it has strengthened Canadian resolve for independence. Instead of demonstrating American economic dominance, it has highlighted American dependence on Canadian resources and markets. Instead of weakening Carney politically, it has transformed him into a national champion. Carney's response to Trump's August tariff escalation perfectly encapsulates this reversal. Rather than escalating rhetorically, he expressed measured disappointment while outlining concrete steps to build Canadian economic resilience. Rather than begging for American mercy, he emphasized what Canada could control, building Canadian strength, supporting Canadian businesses, and diversifying Canadian markets. The trade war continues, but the strategic advantage has clearly shifted. Trump's 35% tariff was supposed to be his trump card. Instead, it became evidence of his desperation. Carney's methodical, strategic response has turned Trump's economic weapon into a tool for Canadian nation-building. In trying to make Canada submit, Trump has instead made Canada stronger and more independent than ever. This is how economic diplomacy works in the modern era, not through bluster and ultimatums, but through strategic patience, domestic mobilization, and the understanding that true power comes from building your own strength rather than trying to tear down others. Carney has given the world a masterclass in how to handle an economic bully, and Trump is learning the hard way that tariffs are a double-edged sword that can cut both ways.